Okay, all right. Looks like we are live, everybody. Let me just make sure that we're signed in here. Awesome. All right. Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. Welcome to another camera class. My name is Saxon, your camera host. Today is the second Thursday of the month, which is our intermediate camera class. Let me pull this up. I just had it loaded. There we go. All right, so let's kind of go through everything. So first and foremost, everybody, thanks for joining as always. My name is Saxon. I teach these camera classes every Thursday from 5:30 to 7. Last week, I think we had some technical difficulties. I don't know if I actually was streaming online live or if it was just a video that got posted after the fact, but I think we're okay now. This week is intermediate camera knowledge for any of those of you who are brand new and want to know more about this. The camera class like this is important, it's fun, it helps teach people new information that you might not necessarily have for your camera. Last week in the intro to camera class, we discussed very rudimentary facts. We talked about things like the automatic controls. I wanted to beat that into your heads because I want everyone to feel comfortable using the camera, get to slowly learn and know the buttons without feeling overwhelmed and rushed. So last week we talked about automatic settings, we talked about the very basics of holding and shooting your camera, SD cards, saving your photos, really the main important details that one might need to know when getting into it. Well, this week we want to break away from that. We want to stop doing the automatic settings. We want to use the camera as a tool. So this week, in our intermediate class, we're going to be talking about the manual controls. What is a manual control and why should we care? Manual control basically means that we're going to learn how to use the camera all the way through in and out. We're going to learn what makes a photographer a little bit different than your standard, let's say, iPhone or point-and-shoot camera user. So without further ado, let me jump right into it. So why do we go advanced for point-and-shoot DSLRs or mirrorless cameras? Why does it matter? Again, we have cell phones all nowadays. Everyone has one. If not, then we have, cameras that can shoot automatically. Why would I want to be more advanced? Well, it's to get the finer details and to get more quality out of our image that we might not have been able to get in the very beginning. If you think about it, if the automatic setting is making it so easy for you to take a picture and to do everything, then what really is the point of shooting in manual control? And really where that comes in is because of the creativity you as the artist are able to employ and to use. This is how I'm going to set this kind of class up, and I like to show this image to start it all off. What is the difference between a snapshot and a photograph? I look at snapshots as quick, easy photos that we're taking to send to our friends, our family. Maybe this escalator looked really cool. Maybe I've never seen an escalator before, so I wanted to send this to my friends and say, look what I saw today. It's kind of cool, right? Maybe I'm telling someone, hey, meet me at the escalator here at Apt Electronics. This is where I'll be standing by. I'll be right at the bottom. It could be any number of reasons. But how do you take something so mundane and simple like this snapshot and turn it into something more artistic and more creative? And how do you create a photograph? And to me, creating a photograph is not just about knowing the camera, but it's about using the information that we have available to us in front of us to help dictate the camera decisions. And that's what I hope to get to you guys to today, or at least to help explain. No matter which way you look at it, there's no one right way or wrong way to take a photo, but there are numbers that are involved within photography that if you can learn what they mean and what they are representing on the scale, then you can learn how to manipulate and use them to take your photos from something so simple, which I took on my cell phone, to then something that I was able to shoot on my Sony. It's a little bit of a difference, but it goes a long way, but it comes to the point of practice and learning how to do everything. So from here, I changed my aspect ratio, I changed my focus parameters, we changed our white balance compensation, we changed our exposure compensation. We also went through and made sure that we shifted and we made our focus point a different aspect than what it was originally. We played with things like our ISO as well too, and our f-stop and shutter speed. All of those played together made something that was this simple turn into something more advanced. Now, would you be able to shoot this type of picture on an automatic setting? Probably not. And that's the type of thing that I'm hoping I can teach you today on how to take your photos from a snapshot to a photograph and to become more advanced or intermediate. So just to go back from last week, first step is to learn your camera. My class last week was a really entry-level beginning point of view on how to do that. However, there's owner's manuals, there's YouTube videos, there's all sorts of resources out there where you can become more generally familiarized with your camera. It's an important thing to do. Every camera you buy is unique. Cameras will have the same functionality as far as ISO, shutter, and f-stop. But feature-wise, control-wise, layout-wise, menu-wise, they're all a little different. So it never hurts. Learn your camera. That's the best step to start with. Now, the mode dial. I talked about how we're going to get away from automatic this week. Now, what does that actually mean from where you're at now? Automatic is the simplest way to use your camera. Turning your camera's dial to automatic will automatically let your camera do all the work for you, but you now are the artist in framing your image. You point and shoot the camera where you'd like. The camera will then take its numbers and all of the information that it sees in front of it, process that with the image sensor to then give you the best image possible based on what it sees. The other settings are where you control them. So again, your next step should always be starting with the automatic, trying then program auto. Automatic is still existing in the program auto, but now certain details like ISO can be changed. Your white balance can be changed. You have picture controls like filters or exposure compensation or white balance, subject detection, focus parameters. All of these can be shifted and updated in program auto, even if they were not available to you in automatic. So you get a little more advanced as you go. Now you want to start doing the actual manual controls of the camera. The first two steps that I recommend, and we're going to break each of these down individually next, is aperture priority and shutter priority. That's going to give you control over each of those features individually. Aperture priority, the camera will run on automatic, you are controlling aperture. Shutter priority, the shutter will run automatically, the shutter you are controlling, everything else is running automatically. And full manual, nothing is auto, you are doing all of the work yourself. The goal from any expert photographer that if they tell you or talk to you about it is that full manual is where most photographers find themselves, because they themselves have been doing this for long enough that they know what numbers and sweet spots to be hitting. Don't overwhelm yourself with this. Nobody's perfect overnight. This takes time and practice, and that's hopefully what I'm helping you learn to do today. We are going to be looking at the exposure triangle. This is one of the most advanced things that I have to really show you today. But if you can learn this, then photography will make more sense to you in the long run, and you are going to be taking excellent photos before you know it. The exposure triangle is pretty simple: aperture, shutter, and ISO. Those are the three main ingredients that, since film cameras have been around till digital cameras, we have used the same terminology. What I'm going to do is break down each of these, talk about them individually, and while I talk about them individually, I'll then express where they can fit within the manual control. After this, we'll then talk and look at some examples. I'll call out what I'm seeing, and then I'll leave you with some tips and tricks that I then have for you as well. Let's look at our aperture priority. Oh, also, anybody watching at home, there is a chat feature. Feel free to chat and ask questions as I'm going. I'll stop and read your answer, question out loud and then answer that for you. Just please keep them appropriate. So aperture priority. What is aperture? Let's look at aperture in the sense of that it does two things. Aperture, its main function and form, is for background to foreground separation. If we look at the picture in the top left corner that's labeled F22, we can clearly see the stick figure and the pyramids behind. Our foreground is the stick figure, our background is the pyramids. That high of a number, that f22, is giving us the ability to keep our foreground and our background flat together on the same surface without really having that much depth of field. As we slowly start to lower our number down, we're going to notice that the background starts to disappear. Things are starting to get blurrier, darker, and then they become non-existent when you get to that f1.4 number. What's happening here is that we are opening the iris of our camera. The iris, or the aperture, is a feature on your camera that allows you to control the foreground to background separation. That's why we can see the pyramid in f22, but as we get lower at that 1.4, we no longer can see it. Now you might be asking, why does this really matter? If I can flip this anytime I want, doesn't this just benefit me in the long run as like a tip or a trick? And the answer in the short form is no. Because here's the second catch to aperture. While yes, f22, you have your foreground and your background, and at f1.4 it's blurry and you can only see the stick figure, the reason these all exist on there is because aperture controls how much light your camera is letting in. Each of these little holes or circles that you see here is a representation of how wide the aperture is open. The smaller the hole, so f22 for example, the more of the background and the foreground you're able to see within the metal iris of your lens. At f1.4, you're letting in a lot of light, which means that it's going to naturally blur the background out and give you focus on just the main subject. Now to look at some examples to explain that a little bit further. If we look at the dog nose here, on the left-hand side we have the dog in the front and then the dog in the background. The dog in the front is completely in focus. The nose, we can see the grooves, the angles, everything on there. The dog in the background, while we can tell it's a dog, we can see the collar, we can kind of see some of the features on there, it's still blurry. If we were to compare the two dogs to our scale, we're probably somewhere between f11 and f8, where yes, the background is blurry, but we can use context clues and use the information there that's given to determine that that's a dog. Now, can we see where the dog's eyes are truly looking? No. Can we make out complete details to see, if the dog has all these extra speckles of brown coming through its black fur? No, not necessarily. But with just aperture priority, we could blur the background. If we were taking that photo, we could move it to an f11 or f8, and we should expect similar results to what we see on the left. On the right side is a little different though. We have our squirrel. The squirrel is in perfect form. There's a little bit of the branch that's brown, but you can see it's chewing either a nut or some sort of fruit or whatever it is. We could probably put two and two together that given the green in the background, that's probably trees and branches, but we can't really make any of that out because it's blurry. So if we compare the squirrel to our chart, this probably puts us closer to that f2, f1.4 range. Again, the idea is that we are closer to being able to blur the background out completely or keep some things around if needed for context clues or for light. Again, the idea with most of this is that you're either thinking of aperture within two regards. The relationship that you're creating within your frame for background and foreground separation, or how much light you're allowing into the camera to get your image. Another image that I have to show this, on the left side, your deeper picture. That is an f22. You can clearly see the background and the foreground. The two look like they're smashed on top of each other. But look at how much darker the dog looks on the left side. Flip that to the right, it's shallower, it's a little bit lighter, and you can see that in the dog's fur and complexion. But because of that shallow nature, we're letting more light into the camera. So it's a catch and a trade-off. When it comes to aperture, you're trying to find the balance between you taking a still image that will give you a deep background give you that depth of field you're looking for with then whatever the subject matter is in the frame. But you're also trying to keep a fine line and balance with that because you have to play with light and the light that's available to you. Now, this is where shooting with something like aperture priority might be fantastic for you. As someone who might not be worried about your ISO or your shutter speed, you're maybe taking pictures of landscape, architecture, nature, and maybe some people or vacationary photos in there too. You're probably going to want to take something with aperture priority, only because you can either keep the background or blur the background out completely. And if there's not a lot of movement that you have to be focused on or worried about, that might be your only concern. So a great time to use aperture priority. I think this picture was a great one. You have this gorgeous background behind you with the sunset happening, the ocean view, this rocky coastal mountain town which looks beautiful. You have your wife, girlfriend, cousin, sister, mother, whoever it is also standing in front of the photo. This is a great picture to use for social media, for friends and family to show this awesome trip that you maybe just went on, or this dinner, or maybe just this new outfit that you have as well too. But if you weren't concerned about the background, you could easily play with the aperture setting and then make it where the background was blurred out and you're focused just on your subject matter. So versatility is really what aperture priority could give you, and moments like this might be the perfect time to use them. Next, we can start to look at shutter speed, or shutter priority. Now, if aperture is your ability to capture depth and field and to allow light in, but it's the ability to blur the background out or keep the background in focus, shutter speed is all about motion, movement. The faster an object is moving in our brains, the faster our shutter speed is moving. Why? Because in order to capture action, we have to be moving fast like the action. And where this comes into play is it's not you moving your body to take the photo. When you watch those guys during NASCAR races and they're like, and they're pulling their body across the way, what they're doing is not necessarily moving themselves super fast. They're positioned on a tripod and they have their shutter speed activated with burst photography. And what they're anticipating is that this car is moving at such a speed that I need to freeze this frame in order to capture that image in perfect detail and clarity. So, with the running man that we have here as our demonstration, our stick figure is running at a pace that we can capture them perfectly at 1/500th of a second. As we start to slow our shutter speed down, we notice that the figure starts to become more wide, and then starts to become more blurry, and then before we know it, at the half a second, we can't see them anymore. Shutter speed is important when you have objects in movement or in motion. You want to be able to freeze frame and capture them and not pick up the blurriness of everything else that's going around. And that's what you see professional sports photographers, NASCAR photography. If people are taking pictures of cars that are moving or motion of any kind, they're typically playing and heavily relying on shutter speed. Now, the way you could be thinking about this is that if it's an intense action, fast, and you need to freeze that action, speed of 1/1000th or faster is typically recommended. Your kids are playing track or cross country. They're playing football. Maybe you're going to Barcelona and there's going to be a surf competition that's going on. You want to get those images. Those kids, those people are moving at great speeds. Playing with a 100 to 500, unless it's like a marathon and they're jogging slowly, probably won't do it for you. So experiment with 1 in 1,000 and don't be afraid to go faster on your shutter in order to capture freeze frame images like this. Within that though, don't be afraid of blurriness. I get a lot of people who come in who take beautiful photos, but they get so upset at themselves for it having blur or motion in there. And I don't think that's a problem, because these photos, when they're captured at such a great speed, a little sense of motion, giving that sense of motion, is almost inherent because of how you captured this. This is a beautiful example of that. The bird in motion, There is a bug that it's trying to capture with its big red beak. It does capture that. The wings, however, though, are blurry. But we get motion from that. If you are someone who's into birds, hummingbirds have one of the fastest wing patterns of all time. They are so quick to the jump. I've heard things that they can't even stop moving. Their heart is geared towards that. So for you to get an image like this, it takes time, practice, and it definitely is just going to take repetition to capture something so smooth. But the yellow, the green, the blue, the browns on this bird are so striking and so detailed. The wings have that motion, but because we know a little bit about hummingbirds, you can see how skillful and hard it was for someone to capture this image. So don't be afraid of a little bit of blur. It helps give motion. And giving motion in these fast burst photographies is something that you want to give to your audience or someone else. Someone could sit there and easily pretend like they're running and look like this, but for you to capture them in full motion is the art of photography in action. Shutter, though, does not just apply to you getting the fast shot. It's also about you allowing the shot to continue for a long period of time. And we do this by long exposures. You can consider half a second a long exposure, but typically in the photography world, we're looking at 5 seconds, 10 seconds, maybe even 20 seconds as a long exposure. What that's doing is it's opening your camera sensor up really wide. It's collecting all this information all at once, and it's oversaturating and giving you incredible detail on the camera, from the camera itself. This image should be a nice example. You can see the different foliage that's going on, the different pitches of green, whether it's dark moss, all the way to some browning dead plants that are at the top. You can see the pattern that the water is falling into. And it gets darker and more detailed the more repeated it falls in the same pattern. You see that airy, almost drizzle-like quality when it gets to the point of not going through the same pattern that it was before. The detail from allowing this to sit and overexpose is a lot more inherent than if you were to do this and let it sit for 1 250th of a second. Now, just like I mentioned with aperture, there's a caveat. You know, if we go with a high number in aperture, we're darkening our image. We're not letting a lot of light in. And if we are going for the 1.4 aperture, we're going to blur out a lot of our image, focus on a subject, but we're going to let a lot of light in. That being said, shutter is going to do something similar. The slower the shutter speed goes will not only give us a blurrier image if that image is in motion, but it'll allow us to make a brighter photo. The slower it takes for our camera to close, the more light that can come into the camera because of that. But we can't always have a slow image because we'll get blurry photos. So we need to then flip-flop. We need faster speeds. Faster speeds are going to freeze our image beautifully, but it's going to lead to darker images. That's why when you look at cameras, there isn't just an f/22 and an f/1.4 in the aperture world, because you need the in-between, the variability. And shutter speed is no different. There are all these different shutter speeds because it is up to you, the photographer, to figure out, with all the other elements that are there, what is my best option. A lot of people, it might take you a little bit of time, a month or so, to get used to this, but for others, practicing and just putting yourself out there is the best way to learn how this works. Before we jump into the next subject, this is why I think shutter priority is so important. This was a photo a customer sent to me. Her son, her boyfriend, someone was playing in a ultimate frisbee league in downtown Chicago. She set the camera in automatic, took these photos, and was just so annoyed. She's like, I don't understand why. And the reason is that automatic is fantastic for your basic images and your processes that you're trying to do. But when it comes into something that's specifically all about speed, movement, intensity, you're going to want to make sure you set your camera to appropriately shoot for that. Shutter priority in these types of situations would be perfect, because where one image might be blurry and not giving you enough, you can then always raise the speed and go faster. In the case of these guys, they get, 3 steps in between each throw. They're sprinting to catch the frisbee. 1 in 1,000 speed is probably going to be enough, and if you need to go faster, you can. But something like this might be perfect because people might be moving slow, might be moving fast, and you have the ability as the photographer to shift your shutter priority in one way or the other. Now the third part of the manual control is ISO. ISO, if you were a film photographer, this might not make that much sense to you, but if you're someone who went from digital to film, you might know this and understand this very well. ISO is what the film technically is when you're shooting in film photography. You have a roll of film that has a number on there, Kodak 400, Ilford 100, Super Gold 800. There were so many different styles of film, and they still make these, and they have different intensities for your ISO. Why is that? The intensity comes from how much light, or it's the sensitivity towards light that the sensor has. So just like it says, same shutter speed and aperture, but different ISO for each image. And you can see how progressively lighter and more saturated the colors become as we raise and bump that ISO up. The more light, whether that's sunlight, fluorescent light, studio lighting, a flashlight, whatever light you have, that light will affect your image, but it'll also affect your camera sensor. To make an image brighter, typically we want a higher ISO in darker situations, and to make an image darker, we would want a darker ISO, or a lower ISO in lighter or darker situations, depending on the situation. When you're shooting, going up and raising the number and slowly moving that dial will show you how your camera is reacting to the light that's available. Where ISO matters. When you're playing with ISO, it might not be that you have ISO priority, but when you're shooting in full manual control, when you've set and done everything on your camera to the way that you like it, typically the last thing to look at is ISO. If your shutter's where you want it to be, your aperture is where you want it to be, but the darkness of your camera still feels off, ISO typically, I'd say 8 out of 10 times, is the issue that you need to fix and adjust in order to help your image blossom a little bit more. Another example of as you raise your ISO up, how much lighter an image can be and how much the settings of your camera can also matter, but when your settings are set to where you need them to be or what you want them to be, a lot of the times, 8 out of the 10 times, I would say it's ISO that you should be updating. Now for you DSLR shooters, what you're going to now see in your camera could be ISO and noise. And this comes from the natural kind of way that this works. Mirrorless cameras don't run into this problem as much, but you can still see it. If you turn your ISO up too high in a situation that doesn't need all that ISO, your camera will start to get pixelated or noisy. I like to think about it as that static that you would see of snow on the TV when it would go blank. That's what it feels like as being embedded into your photo. It feels like sand. You're turning your ISO up too high in a situation where your camera doesn't need all that ISO. Instead of washing it out, blurring it out, and making it white and muted, it'll make it noisy instead. And you'll pick up on that right away. Readjusting ISO and maybe playing with your aperture or your shutter levels in order to get the quality of image that you want without getting the noise is the next step. Mirrorless cameras typically don't run into this problem as much, but what you will see with mirrorless, the screen will be completely white or almost black if the ISO is too low or high. Auto ISO, when to use it. This is a question that I get asked a bunch. I personally will always say shoot automatic ISO. While yes, it is fantastic to have the customization and to do everything that you might want on a personal level, but one thing I will say with auto ISO is that these new mirrorless cameras are so smart they can intelligently recognize when there is a lot of light and when there isn't a lot of light available in the room that you're shooting in. With that being said, if I run into problems where I need to change, that's where I might start playing with things like exposure compensation. And I'll talk about exposure compensation next. But I had a mother a few years ago ask me something similar about automatic ISO, and I told her that the best time to use this would probably be when you're shooting photos within indoor and outdoor settings. She was getting ready for prom season with her kid, and this was the perfect time. She was taking photos outdoors at somebody's house, and then they were going to go to so-and-so's house and take pictures in front of a fireplace. And she was going to be the main mom that everyone hit up at the very end for those photos. She was, counting on taking good photos and having the quality. So what we had worked on and talked about was using automatic ISO. Camera would recognize that she was indoors, lower its ISO to an appropriate number depending on the lighting that existed in the room she was in. When she hit outdoors, depending on overcast, cloudy, bright and sunny day, that all then would affect how the camera outdoors worked. But again, that sensor is smart enough on the camera that it recognizes lighting is different here. Let's lower or raise based on what we're sensing and picking up. So don't be afraid to use it, experiment with it. Again, some people, they shoot on 800 ISO their whole life and they get away with it. Other people, they have their own tips and tricks, and some people, I had a professor when I was in college who taught me a lot of what I know. He was so particular to the point he had a notebook. And if he took a picture that he didn't understand, he'd write down the number, he'd write down everything from the photo, and he'd go back in, dissect every little bit and piece so he could figure out why this looked different than others, and he'd write notes about that with his camera settings. Again, no one's telling you to get that particular with it. Don't be afraid to try this out. Don't be afraid to also just manually control ISO. It's really up to you. Because at the end of the day, all three of these features come together to create manual control. And I want to make sure I preface this so much to you. A lot of the times when you see this type of chart or display laid out, they'll lay it out in a little triangle. And I think that that's the hardest thing, because some people think, well, this, then this, and then this. In reality of this, these numbers are going to change with each other or independently of each other. But no matter what, they all feed off of each other. That being said, it's not uncommon for you to change these numbers and then go back in and tweak them to get the image right. Just because you set your aperture to what it needs to be, you might still not be letting enough light in as you change ISO and shutter, so now we have to readjust the aperture, and vice versa. The important thing is to not be afraid of changing those things, and not be afraid that because you set your camera to this, now you got to readjust and set to this. Without boring you too much more, let's go into the review. So aperture, the top section of pictures, is your f-stop or aperture. The higher the number is in your aperture world, the more of the background and the foreground that you're going to see in total in the photo. The lower the number is within aperture world, is the then more you're going to blur out the background, and we're just going to focus in on our subject. In between those two numbers, we are then going to see variations of it, starting at the 16, building our way down to 124. Shutter, the middle section of photos with the hammer, kind of similar. At the 1/1000th point of view, we are shooting the camera extremely fast. Therefore, as the hammer comes down, we're stopping the motion. If this person is swinging with the same gusto to hit the hammer or to hit the nail with the hammer, as we get to half a second, it's blurry and you barely can tell what is even going on in the image. The only thing that stays constant is that board. That board is staying constant because it's staying in the same place even as this person is moving the hammer. ISO, we're controlling the sensitivity towards light our camera is receiving. In DSLR days, if we raise the number too high, it's going to cause the image to become noisy and pixelated. In the mirrorless world, if we raise it too high, it's going to become too dark or too light. So that's one way to look at that when you're shooting on mirrorless versus the new DSLR. But at ISO 100 to ISO 200 or 2500, it's all dependent on the light that you have available to you and the sensitivity that you're setting your ISO for. The higher the number in ISO, the more sensitive. The lower the number, the less sensitive. It's all based on the light that you have in front of you. Now, those are the three holy grail pieces of understanding photography: ISO, shutter, and aperture. You bring those three together, you have your exposure triangle, and if you pick up any camera, I'd say within the last 40 years, 50 years, you should be able to understand how to change those two dials and shoot and take a photo. In the mirrorless digital age, though, there's more that we can play with, more tools. As a photographer, one of the things you can get used to is exposure and exposure compensation. Let's say you have now set your ISO, your shutter, your aperture perfectly, but the image still doesn't look right. Still too dark, still too light. We can over-brighten or under-brighten the image by changing the exposure on the meter. By going up or down one spot, we're going to allow for the total exposure to become more dark or more light. This is more of a film trick. You'd expose your film for a longer period of time. It could help areas in your darker photos appear more light. It also could help your photos that were too light appear more dark if you underdid the exposure time. This is what those terms are referring back to. In the digital age, though, this just takes the image that you get on your screen and makes it brighter or darker, and then it'll save that image once you hit the trigger and pull. Light metering, I mentioned at the beginning when I broke down the snapshot versus a photograph. But there's multiple sensors or way for your camera to look at this. And to make this as simple as possible, the way you should look at it is that your sensor on the inside of your camera is looking for light everywhere. Anywhere it can find light, it's going to pull it into this image, and it's going to help illuminate the image as best as possible. That might be too much light based on the situation that we're in, and even with our ability to change ISO and exposure, we might still need a little bit of manipulation on that. That is where we can then change our light metering. We can choose from at what point our camera is absorbing this light from and pulling it. It can pull from the matrix or the multi, which is typically the center or the whole piece. The center is usually only weighting it at the center, and spot will go a little further than center, because center will take what's in the middle and then what radiates off of it. I like to think about it like a microwave. On the other version of spot, it's keeping it real tight in that one spot, and it's not looking at what's coming off of that. Why that might matter to you, if you have set up lighting that you're using, studio lighting, if you are taking a picture of something particular, maybe your model is using a candle or one light individually. Spot, center might be a great option for you to go in and actually just see that light as a whole, whereas multi might make a little less sense if you're trying to be more dramatic or gloomy. It really all comes down to your more artistic measure that you want to take when making these photos, and how these light metering points might benefit you in those situations. White balance is another one to go through. I won't bore you with all the details and paragraphs to this. Again, these videos are always available on YouTube at the Apt Electronics page. You can always re-watch these and screenshot or take photos of this as you see it. But the way to look at white balance is that light is judged by the spectrum it comes in on. Light goes from a blue cold tone, that's the higher Kelvin numbers, to a orange-red tone, which is usually the lower Kelvin numbers. Sad and gloomy is higher. More alive, awake, lively flame is at then the lower end. This is the spectrum that light lives on. So from that being said, white, the color, is affected by this. When light penetrates through and it hits the color white, it can shift white to make it look at all sorts of different tones and looks. Therefore, it's important that we can kind of understand what that means and figure it out. So for most of your cameras, automatic is what it's set to. It'll automatically read the type of light that it's seeing, figure out the closest color to white, and then balance that off. But you can also force your camera to do this, depending on your situation. Settings exist. The ability to change the color recognition temperature exists. Everyone's cameras are typically in the ballpark, though, of presets, where you can go through and select a preset based on what you're seeing. Again, why does all this matter? The goal is full manual control. If you're a photographer or an artist and you're getting into photography, your end goal should be learning how to use the full manual control and being able to take all that information in and use it properly. That's the end goal. What I'd like to do now for you guys, actually, hold on. Yeah, what I'd like to do now is I want to show you some images. I'm going to read out loud, or say out loud, what I think the settings they're using are and why I think that is. Everyone can think a little bit differently as this goes, but the idea is that I want to be able to read an image and figure out what controls or settings that I might need to use in order to capture the image properly. This then helps me learn and educate myself so that when I'm in the field and I'm doing something, I don't have to sit there and think, well, if it's a higher ISO number, it might turn out grainy. No, I have life experience of shooting these photos and doing all the things that I do that I can kind of tell by looking at something that if I tweak and do this and then pull the trigger, I'm going to get some of the similar or the same results. So, without further ado, we start with this building that appears to be in Germany, and I only say this because I have done this picture a bunch of times. There is a building on the left-hand side that says Halsenjord, which is like a German or Austrian term. However, though, you can see how dark this picture is, but there's a lot of light coming from the windows, almost an overabundance of light. That would lead me to believe that there is a high ISO presence. You can also see a level of graininess, especially in the darkest corners of this photo, where you can tell that the ISO is turned up too much based on the, whatchamacallit. The ISO was turned up way too much based on light that was already existing. So ISO in this case, I probably would put this closer to a 3200. And I would assume this because then the way that the foreground and the background come together, we're definitely sitting somewhere closer to an f16, f22. So to compensate for this, f32 or ISO is 3200 or higher. Aperture then isn't letting a lot of light in, so we see both the foreground and the background. And then shutter in this case, I think would have been the thing that would have been slower. I probably would have said 1 1/100th or 1 2/50th of a second, unless they were using a tripod. But again, just seeing the graininess of this, I think this is a quicker photo with not a lot of light being shown and ISO trying to compensate for that. Here we have some cherry blossoms. We can clearly see there are more cherry blossom trees behind this one set, but we can't make out the full details. Aperture is probably going to be closer to an f4, maybe f2.8, but just because we can see some of the branches behind it, I think it's a little higher, maybe f4, f5.6. ISO, maybe 100 to 200, or 100 to 200. There's a lot of light out there. Doesn't need to have a lot of oversaturation. Doesn't have to have a lot of ISO in order to get this shot. And the shutter is probably going to be close to 1/100th or 1 2/50th of a second. That's a standard time. It's not slow, but it's not fast. And just unless these branches are moving violently in the wind because of a storm or air, that's what I would probably say for that one. Here we have two firemen, one walking behind the other. We can see the fireman in the front clear as detail, but the other fireman in the background we barely can see. This kind of reminds me of the golden retriever photo we looked at in the beginning, where we could see the one dog's nose, but we couldn't see the other. In this case, we can tell they're wearing the same outfit. We can see the walkie-talkie on his chest behind them. We just really can't tell where the eyes are going or maybe exactly where they're looking. I'd assume at us. So aperture-wise, we're probably sitting at that 4 to 2.8, I would say. ISO, given that the light itself is more on the red or the warm side of the Kelvin, I don't think ISO has to be too high, but definitely higher because of how recessed the lighting looks. And just given the shade on their face and the helmet, I would probably say ISO is somewhere closer to 800. And shutter speed, to get the detail, to get everything on there, I probably would say that it doesn't have to be that fast. 1 2/50th of a second is probably enough at this point for that one. I always ask customers about this one. Do you think that the RAM is real, or do you think it's stuffed? I personally think it's stuffed. I think this is like a natural history museum exhibit. And I also think it's stuffed because the detail on it is exquisite. And the fact that you could get this close to an animal that's known to ram people and to hit you, I just don't think that's possible. Looking at this, we can see the detail in the fur. First and foremost, if you look behind, we can see that there's not a lot of detail behind. These are blurred out. What appears to be a tree trunk, some dead branches, and snow is more a bush. So I probably would say that that's closer to a 4.8, maybe a 5 as far as the aperture is concerned. ISO, I think, is turned down dramatically a little bit lower on purpose. I think that there's light coming from the top of this creature, and we can see that light coming through. So to keep it a little bit more doomy and gloomy, I think the ISO is somewhere around 400, where it should be at least closer to 8 to get full light. And the reason that I talk about the shutter speed on there is because, again, if it's moving, that's a whole different story, but that detail on there leads me to believe that this was a slower, maybe not necessarily a longer exposure, but maybe 1/100th of a second, where you're letting it stay open, or 1/50th of a second. Something where you can still hold it in your hand and get a semi-long exposure to give you the detail and the saturation that you're getting off that. Now we got more action. We have dogs midair trying to catch the frisbee. Let's think about aperture first. If we look at these photos, the backgrounds are blurred out pretty good. On the one on the left, I would say it's more blurred out than the right. The right one, you can tell there's trees, foliage, there's branches. The left side, I believe that's cars, and then just green, grass, everything else. Speeds are easily at 1 1,000th of a second or faster, possibly even more, because of how fast these dogs can go based on the frisbee. The dog on the right is completely airborne trying to catch this thing, and so is the dog on the left, but it's incredible on the right. And then as far as the ISO goes, the sun is bright. You can see their shadows clearly on the floor. So the sun is in the top right section of where they're at. So as far as the ISO goes, for the speed that it's being shot at and for the aperture that it has, ISO probably doesn't need to be that high. I'd say 400 at the most, just to be on the safe side with how fast the camera's going. You might be able to bump it up to 800. I think this is one of the last photos, and I have a few more tidbits for you guys. You got a touchdown happening right here, players jumping into the end zone. You can see the background slightly. He evaded some tackles and got past them. You can tell one guy's on the ground, one's standing up. The one looks like number 6. So I would probably say that the aperture on this one is more of an f8, maybe f11. From there then, ISO is definitely going to be low. Or I would say low enough, because at the speed they're capturing this, we got to compensate with ISO. Speed is at least 1 in 1,000, if not 1 in 1,500th of a second, maybe even 2,000th of a second, depending how fast that guy was just running in to score the touchdown. Throw that into the fact, that's where then ISO is probably closer to 800, maybe even a little higher, because of how fast he's running in. And because of how low that aperture is. If it's at an 8 or 11, not a lot of light's coming in, so we have to make up with it with our ISO. I like to always say this at the end, but learning your camera is only the start. Anyone can learn to use a camera. I've been teaching this class for almost 3 years. There are certain people who do come back to my class every couple months because they just don't touch the camera. They don't have time, and so it sits, it collects dust, and then they forget how to use it. go outside, bring the camera with you. If you're going to do something, take it with you, practice, try it out, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Practice is one of the best camera accessories that you can buy without even buying anything. Classes are fantastic too. If you have the ability to go sign up for a class, do it. My classes are free. That's what I'm here for, is to try to help you get a base understanding of your camera, so hopefully it helps you either educationally buying something, or just give you more product knowledge for the thing you already bought. YouTube is one of my favorite resources. There's not a thing you can't fix without YouTube out there nowadays. Workshops are great too. You can talk to like-minded individuals, learn more about their camera, and that might even give you more information and creativity for your own camera. And then travel. I'm leaving for Texas in a week, and then I go to Spain in October. I will definitely have my camera with me everywhere I go for both of those experiences, for not only just the fact that I get to practice and use my camera more, but there might be one great photo out of that whole thing that I'm able to capture and get into good detail that I'd kick myself if I didn't get before. Now, if it were me though, and I had to actually go out and buy things, I tell people all the time, the top 4 items that I have listed there for you are what you should be doing. Buy yourself a camera bag, protect your equipment, protect your investment. Get yourself an extra battery and an extra memory card. Extra batteries don't cost that much. Batteries only last about 500-ish, 400-ish shots, depending on the battery that you're getting. So having an extra one is always helpful. Memory cards are great too. If one fills up, at least you have it. Memory cards can occasionally go bad every once in a while, so having a second backup one, great. Lens cleaning kit is one of my personal favorites. Do not use your sweatshirt, shirt, or sweater to clean your lenses off. Use a proper lens cleaning kit. Get yourself a camera strap, get yourself a tripod. Those are great accessories to get. Most cameras will come with a strap. Tripods if you need the stability. External hard drives to save your photos and all your information. Get yourself a polarizer filter, an ND filter if you're shooting outdoors a lot with high glare. And additional lenses are one of the big things too. Start, if you're brand new at this, like I said last week, the kit lenses exist for a reason, folks. Start there, and as you learn what it is you're taking more photos of, what you like, then start to upgrade your materials and get yourself really that final push. And that's all I have for you guys today. So today was the intermediate cameras. I got a couple of you guys watching. Next week is advanced cameras, which I have to say, sadly, I will be out of town for next week. So all of you guys watching at home, and I will send out a notice through Facebook most likely on our app page. Camera classes next Thursday for September 18th will instead happen September 15th on the Monday. So again, September 15th, next week, in a couple days, is when we will be doing our advanced camera class. And then after that, we'll end the month on the 25th with our Beyond the Traditional camera class, and things will go back to normal. So just want to give everyone that update. It doesn't look like many of you guys have questions for me. I know I usually stay online if you guys have questions, but I've noticed no one really does for the most part. So what I'll do is this. You guys have my contact screen that I just had up there. I'll put it back up now if you need it. I'm here every day except for Tuesdays and Wednesdays. My camera department is located on the main sales floor next to the fish or aquarium that we have here. You can always call in, check out the website to see what stock and inventory we have, or just give us a call if you have questions in general. We're always more than happy to help and get you through figuring out what your next camera, lens, or accessory might be needed for whatever you're doing. My name is Saxon. I'm here every single Thursday from 5:30 to 7. As a reminder, Monday will be our advanced camera class. That is September 15th, this upcoming Monday. If you guys need any questions, helps, or concerns, just give me a call. And as always, guys, keep shooting.